Today we're going to be visiting 3 different centers. You're going to be using your color scheme, so the primary color that you chose and the secondary color that's next to it on the color wheel. And you are going to be using these colors over and over at every center you visit. Our centers are going to be mostly about line and texture today. One of the centers you go to today will have markers, papers, and also rulers, and you will also have a marker messy mat. The first thing you're going to do is choose a paper that fits your color scheme. So my color scheme was yellow and green, so I can pick the yellow paper or the green paper. If you have time to do more than one of these papers, you can do 2, but if the timer's almost up and you've only finished one, that is fine. At this center, you are going to be using a ruler and markers also in your color scheme to create different vertical, horizontal, or diagonal lines across your paper. You can do it in any design or pattern you want, as long as you're doing lines that are in your color scheme. Whenever you have finished a center, be sure to clean it up and make it look nice and neat for the next people that will be visiting. And also remember that anytime you are done at a center, you take your papers and you go back to the place where you have placed your kind of messy mat, and you leave these 2 papers on your big white paper so that we can keep track of whose is whose. At another center, you will find water-soluble oil pastels, water, and some white papers, and hopefully a messy mat. You will start by folding your paper in half lengthwise, so you kind of get that hot dog fold. And then once you fold it, you're going to open it back up. We want to do 2 different kinds of textures on each side of our paper. Again, remember, we are working in our color scheme. So my color scheme again was yellow and green, so I can use any kind of yellow, any kind of green to do different kinds of lines that create texture. I want to make sure that my texture goes off the edges of my paper and is not just stuck in the middle. So I'm going to do some kind of curly line texture. And again, I want to make sure that that texture goes off the edges of my paper. And I also want to be kind of quick about it. I don't want to spend too long making some elaborate pattern or texture, because you'll see why in just a minute. You do want to use, again, the colors in your color scheme. I would encourage you to use both colors with oil pastel. On that side, I did kind of a curly texture. Now I might do kind of just a bunch of straight lines. If you get a pastel where it's hard to use the pastel because the paper's kind of getting in the way, you are more than welcome to peel some of that paper off so you can see more of the pastel. Now I'm going to take my water. These oil pastels are water soluble, which means when they get wet, they dissolve. I'm going to take water and I'm going to start to brush over my pastels, and it almost turns kind of like into a watercolor paint. You have to go back and reload your brush a lot. You want to keep it nice and wet. So I'm going to keep on going back and getting more water until I can brush all that kind of color it's creating off of the edges. And if yours does not seem to be working, you need more water. I'm going to keep on brushing this one. And I will do the same thing on the other side, brushing kind of some of that texture down and getting some of that color to show up. Don't forget that when you're done with the center, make sure you organize it, clean it up as best as you can for the next people that will be coming there. And this paper is kind of wet, so carry it carefully. And don't forget that you are going to take your paper, and it's always going to go back to that paper that has your name on it, so we know that that paper belongs to you. Just set it on the paper next to the ones you've already made. My last center is the texture center. So I again want to take one of these white papers and fold it in half lengthwise to get kind of that hot dog fold. And then I'm going to choose some of the texture rubbing plates on the tray. Pick one, and you are going to slide it kind of into the fold. This folding will help keep your paper still. You will then use some of the crayons that do not have wrappers on them. And again, you're working in your color scheme, so you can pick any color of crayon that fits your color scheme. Mine again was green and yellow, so I can use any crayon that is green or yellow. When you do texture rubbings, you don't want to draw with the crayon on its tip. You want to make that kind of a lazy crayon, make it lay down, and then you're going to push and pull to get that texture to show up on your paper. You are going to do that on this side until the entire side is filled up, and you can layer both colors. So if I do a little bit of green, I can layer a little bit of yellow in there. I can kind of change colors, but you want to try to keep your paper still so you can see that texture. Once you've finished one side, you want to flip it to the other side. You want to change and probably do a different texture, but you can use the same color of crayons. So both sides of the paper need texture, and this folding really just helps to keep the paper still so that it's not moving as you're doing your texture rubbing. Once you're done with your texture rubbing, you're going to open your paper up flat. You're going to clean up the crayons as well as the texture rubbing plate. If you don't need them anymore, just put them back on the tray. And the last step at this station is to do a watercolor resist. So you do want to put your paper on top of a messy mat. You're going to get your brush nice and wet, and you can use any of the colors that are in your color scheme. So again, I can use the greens, I can use the yellows, and you want this to be pretty wet and liquidy. You are going to brush over your textures to kind of fill in some of the white space that is left behind. So I'm going to keep on doing that until my entire paper has been brushed over with watercolor. Not just water at this station, you need to use the watercolors to get some color kind of in the background. Remember that once you're done, you're going to take all papers to that white paper with your name on it. This entire white paper will go on the drying rack so that all of your stuff stays together, and all of it should be part of the same color scheme.